Yo, what's up? It's Jason back with another video and another ranking. This time I'm not tackling a year, but rather a genre. I think I've already done a video of this before. I'm not sure, but basically I decided I'm going to do my top 10 punk albums in my collection. A little bit difficult. In fact, I had quite a bit of leftovers, so I'll show you the leftovers at the end. I probably could have done a top 20, um, but try to keep it short. And I was just watching a couple of other people doing their top tens recently of their favorite punk albums, and noticed that there were kind of a few that I disagree with, or I mean, I like them, but I wouldn't have them in my top 10. Bands like The Clash and Misfits, I've never been that big into, so they wouldn't showcase even in my top 20. Then I was going through some of my records, and it was like realizing some bands I really like a lot of their tracks, but I don't necessarily think they have a strong album, or there isn't one album that I'm super big fan of. There's even a couple in this top 10 that maybe are a little bit like that too, in terms of the overall album is maybe not top to bottom the best, but nevertheless, I also tried to keep this list down to only showing one album per band. Whereas there's some bands that I love so much, I could probably list all four of their studio albums in this top 10, and then that would occupy four spots already. So I try to keep it to one release per band. Now I have some EPs in here. I didn't go with any compilation albums or live albums for this list. So keep in mind, this is my list. So it's maybe not going to be the same list that you guys would have or you would pick, but put down in the comments below what your top 10 favorite punk albums are if you want, and let's see what you got. For my number 10, I'm going with kind of an obscure pick here. This has been a band I've loved since they first came out in the 80s, from BC, Vancouver, from Vancouver Slow, not to be confused with Sloan. But this is a very short-lived band. Pretty much just this one release and one 12-inch, Against the Glass. It's just a killer EP. It's only 6 tracks. Very garage rock style punk, and really fun. And they had 2 videos back in the day on Much Music, so Against the Glass and Have Not Been the Same, which were 2 of my favorite songs. I had this album when I was younger, sold it, regretted it for decades. It took me a couple decades to hunt down a copy of this. And then, of course, when I finally get a nice, pristine OG copy, it's on a very obscure kind of West Coast BC label, Zulu Records. What happens a couple years after I finally get my copy, they reissued the whole thing. On a Canadian label, reissued it on CD, vinyl, and you can find it on Spotify. So what was kind of like my secret favorite band is now out in the open. And I think they did a reunion tour even too, but I missed that. But anyway, my number 10, Slow. Number 9, very well-known band, and again, kind of mix of punk and garage rock a little bit, and rockabilly. Going with the Cramps' first album, Songs the Lord Taught Us. Now, I'm also a really big fan of Psychedelic Jungle, the second album. In fact, that was one of the first, I think that was the first Cramps album I had as a kid, but again, I sold it at the time and have not been able to track it down. I'm in the process of tracking down an OG copy, but it's going to cost me. It's going to hurt a little bit. It's going to be more than $50 probably at this point. But I do have an OG press of this one. About 10 years ago or so, I snatched this and a couple other OG Cramps records for my collection. And this one is pretty solid all the way through, but it's got some real standouts. Of course, Garbage Man, and what else? Drug Train is on here. Their cover of Fever's on here. Mad Daddy, Mystery Train, the TV track. But yeah, Garbage Man was kind of my introduction to the Cramps, seeing that video. Being a kid, we were big on videos in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, and I remember the first time seeing the Cramps, Garbage Man, thinking, this is some awesome shit. I know it's kind of punk, but it's also garage rock, and just crazy characters. So that's my number 9 for this list. Number 8, going with another childhood favorite, DRI, Dealing With It. This is kind of their debut album. because before this they have the Dirty Rotten EP, and which I have a couple copies of. So a lot of those songs, some of those songs are on this album as well, but there's even more. Tons and tons of short songs. As a ticket, I got to see DRI back in 2017. The concert was amazing. They played like a million songs, really extended set. And this was my introduction to DRI. I used to have this on cassette, Canadian pressing on Fringe. This one's the Death Records pressing, which is sub-label Metal Blade. And that's kind of like how I got into DRI. It was actually through kind of thrash metal at the time, and listening to this crossover hardcore got me into a lot of punk, and totally loved it. I mean, these guys, COC, Corrosion of Conformity, Dayglow Abortions, were kind of the big sort of crossover bands between metal and hardcore punk. Awesome album. A lot of killer tracks on here. Pretty funny stuff too. But Reaganomics on here. I Don't Need Society. Rather Be Sleeping. The list goes on. That is my 8. Number 7. Gotta go with Minneapolis, Minnesota. Replacements. Sorry Ma, forgot to take out the trash. One of their early albums, if not their first or second album. Just amazing record. This record's really grown on me over the years. I didn't have this when I was younger. I kind of got introduced to Replacements through Tim and the Bastards of Young video. No videos for this early stuff. This is much more punky than Tim and their later more alt kind of sound, but this one is really kick-ass. Again, lots of pretty short songs, 9 songs on each side. This is a reissue from a little while back. Rhino Records did the reissue, originally on Twin Tone. And if you're not a Replacements fan or you haven't heard them yet, definitely check them out. This is a killer hardcore style punk record. Their later stuff is quite different style, similar to another band that's going to be in this top 10 where they sort of change or evolve their sound over the years. But this one still rocks. Play it lots. I gotta say, like, most of this top 10 are records that I play often, over and over again. That's kind of how it qualified in here. So number 6, I'm gonna go with another debut. I could have went with Road to Ruin, which is just as favorite as this album for me for Ramones, but the debut is kind of where it all started for everyone, including myself. Not in the 70s, I was way too young then, but when I got a copy of this in the 80s, loved it. Who doesn't love Ramones? Simple rock and roll, fast rock and roll songs. And there's just tons of them on here. Some of the stuff I can't listen to anymore, I think, because I've just heard it way too many times, but nevertheless, it's in my top 10. My number 6. Now, number 5. Rounding out the top 5, this might be an unusual pick for some people, but I'm going with Agent Orange, and this is the voice. Again, a little bit of a punk fusion pick here in my top 10, but this is their second album, and it's much more refined and well produced compared to their earlier stuff, but still got those elements of surf and kind of skater punk, pre-emo, I guess, in a sense. But I say that in a good way, not in a bad way. But yeah, it's a really great sort of melodic punk from the West Coast. Still love this album a lot. Play it a lot. Got an OG copy a while back and pretty happy with it. I don't know if it's ever been reissued, but this one is originally on Enigma Records. It's my number 5. Number 4. By the way, a lot of these bands, this would pretty much be my ranking of favorite punk bands, give or take a few that maybe don't show up here, but number 4, I got to go with Husker Du. And this is my favorite Husker Du record in my collection, is the Metal Circus EP. 6 tracks in total, all of them killer, no filler. Diane, Real World, Deadly Skies, It's Not Funny Anymore, First of the Last Calls. You got a little bit, some sort of more mid-tempo stuff on here, but it's still lots of raging hardcore as well. Band like the Replacements, also from Minnesota, and who, you know, evolved their sound over the years as well, became much more melodic, more mellow. But the later Du stuff is really good too. So Husker Du, just one of my all-time fave bands. These next 3, this top 5 is kind of my top 5 punk bands in that order, I guess, in terms of the records too. So number 3, go back to the West Coast with Circle Jerks, the Group Sex first album, their debut album. I mean, you got to give it up to debut albums often because like they really breaking the mold in terms of what their sound's going to be. And just some killer tracks on here. I love Keith Morris, who also sang in Black Flag. But Circle Jerks is one of his main bands, and just all the albums are really great. It was hard to pick one out of the few that I have, but went with the debut. Number 2, with that classic, I had to pick a Black Flag record. Almost picked the first 4 years compilation, but like I said earlier, I wasn't going to do compilations. Could also went with My War, which was a big one for me. I kind of can't remember if I really first discovered Black Flag on My War or Damage, but I had both of them really early on. In fact, this is my OG copy, original copy from when I was a kid. Still in pretty good shape. On Roadrunner Records, not the SST one, but yeah, absolute classics. Now, some of these songs you can also hear sung by Keith Morris of Circle Jerks and other vocalists, which are really cool versions too. But this is the Henry Rollins debut on Black Flag. And last but not least, my number 1, if you haven't guessed it by now, t-shirt and all, gotta go with the Dead Kennedys. I love the Dead Kennedys, probably my favorite punk band overall, and it has to be the Dead Kennedys with Jello Biafra. I don't know what they're doing with the new version of the band, but classic all the way. Didn't pick the debut here for my number 1. I just always love this album a little bit more than the other 3, but I love all of them almost equally. I think I had this one first when I was younger. Plastic Surgery Disasters, just some really killer tracks. Every song on this album is awesome. So that makes my number 1, and that's my top 10. Now I'll just quickly show, before this video runs out, what was missing. What would have been in the bottom, top 20. More amazing punk albums, right? Some essential punk, etc. records. But that's my top 10. You guys let me know what you guys think and what would be in your top